Life could be brutal when you were different, but 100 years ago, it was downright hellish. Parents often sold off their kids to circuses or freak shows, signing them away to a lifetime of exploitation and mockery. While some performers were just stared at because of how they looked, others were forced to entertain the crowds with tricks and acts, all for the shock and amusement of whoever bought a ticket. So stick around for today's video as we dig into the disturbing world of the 15 most creepy circus freaks you won't believe actually existed. Number 15. The Fiji Mermaid. The infamous P.T. Barnum knew the truth didn't sell, but a good lie always did. The Fiji Mermaid wasn't a creature. It was a crude mashup, the torso of a dried monkey sewn onto the tail of a fish. Under dim lighting, it looked real enough. Barnum didn't invent it, but he bought it off a sailor and turned it into a sensation. Newspapers debated its authenticity. Scientists argued. Preachers warned. Barnum didn't care. He forged letters, hired fake professors, and created such a cloud of confusion that people bought tickets just to decide for themselves. It wasn't about belief. It was about doubt. Doubt filled seats. The hoax was eventually exposed, but by then, Barnum had made a fortune. The mermaid didn't need to be real. It just had to be convincing in the moment. That was the whole game. In the end, the Fiji Mermaid didn't just trick people. It proved something bigger. That illusion, sold right, will always beat truth in a crowd. Number 14. Nicholas Ferry. Nicholas Ferry was never treated as a person. He was Bébé, the king's living toy. He was born in 1741 in rural France, and Ferry had dwarfism and never grew past 3 feet. King Stanislav of Poland scooped him up as a court curiosity, housing him in the Château de Luneville like a pet in a palace. He was dressed in lace, pampered, mocked, and paraded for laughs. At first, the novelty charmed the court. But when Joseph Borulaski, who was another dwarf, but smarter, sharper, visited, Bébé's insecurities snapped. He lashed out, and the king had him beaten. From there, it unraveled. Bébé's body began to decay, his bones softening, and his posture collapsing. By 20, he was aging in reverse. He died at 22, more spectacle than man. His skeleton was studied, his memory stuffed into museum drawers. His clothes, furniture, and name survived. But what didn't? His pride. His story isn't about court life. It's about how easy it is to entertain people with someone else's dignity. And he was just one of the many so-called circus freaks. Number 13. Count Primo Magri. Primo Magri stood just under 3 feet tall, but there was nothing small about how he lived. He was a performer, businessman, and strategist who knew exactly how to market his image. In 1885, he married Lavinia Warren, who was the widow of famous General Tom Thumb, and their wedding became a headline event. Together, they built a career out of appearances, on stage, in magazines, and even before royalty. Some said his title came from Pope Pius IX. Others claimed it was just good branding. Either way, he wore it with pride. Alongside Lavinia and his supposed twin brother Giuseppe, who performed as Baron Littlefinger, Magri toured internationally, acting in stage plays like Gulliver Among the Lilliputians and The Rivals. They eventually opened a roadside attraction in Massachusetts and stayed active in performance for decades. In 1915, he starred in a silent film with Lavinia. When he died in 1920, he was still working. Magri didn't fade into circus history. He walked through it in tailored shoes. Number 12, the Mammoth Lady. The woman called the Mammoth Lady barely left a trace, but the weight of her story still hangs heavy. What we do know is that she was known only as Susan Barton, and her image appeared in a 1849 Currier and Ives lithograph, where she's described as weighing 579 pounds, her waist 7 feet around. Whether that was true, made up, or circus fluff didn't matter. Barnum's American Museum took her in, and people came to gawk. She stood beneath a banner, reduced to a measurement. There are also no letters or voice of hers, just that frozen image, a woman standing still, being seen but never heard. She didn't breathe fire or swallow swords. She just existed, and that was enough for a paying crowd. Maybe she hated it. Maybe it paid the rent. We'll never know. Her name isn't even guaranteed. Susan Barton might have been a stage name or someone else entirely. The Mammoth Lady's real story isn't in her size. It's in how fast everything else about her disappeared. She was seen, judged, and then forgotten. Number 11. The Minnesota Woolly Girl. Alice Dougherty was born in Minneapolis with hypertrichosis lanuginosa that covered her face and body in fine blonde hair. She didn't ask to be stared at, but she was shown anyway. First by her own parents, who managed her bookings, and then by a string of small-town showmen. Her name became a brand, the Minnesota Woolly Girl. She wasn't wild, fierce, or dramatic. Most people described her as quiet and gentle, the exact opposite of the nickname slapped on every poster. She spent her childhood in dime museums across the Midwest, seated in a chair, letting people look. Unlike her more famous counterparts with the same condition, she never had a major backer or a global spotlight. By 1915, she left it behind, retreating from the world that profited off her difference. Her life didn't end in scandal or showbiz collapse. It simply moved on. Alice wasn't a freak, a legend, or a sideshow. She was just someone trying to be left alone. Number 10. The Ice King. Carl Brew, better known by his stage name Tom Jack, didn't just endure life, he made it a show. Born in Austria with albinism, his ghostly appearance stood out long before he ever performed. Apprenticed to a traveling magician as a teen, he dove into escape artistry with a hunger for danger. Locked crates, ice tanks, blazing cages, whatever could kill him, he practiced escaping it. Inspired by Houdini, he rebranded himself the Ice King and carved his niche as Europe's only albino escape artist. He was locked in frozen coffins, submerged in icy rivers, and even buried beneath snow, and each time, he clawed his way back out. His pale skin and white hair became more than a look. They were his armor. People came for the spectacle, but they remembered the stare, calm, cold, unbothered. Brew never made millions, but in a brutal business, he made a name that stuck. Not because he escaped ice, but because he never cracked under it. Number 9. Ella Harper. Ella Harper was born in Hendersonville, Tennessee, just after the Civil War, with a condition that caused her knees to bend backward. Standing upright was painful, but she moved easily on all fours. That's what made her the Camel Girl. In 1886, circus manager W.H. Harris paid her $200 a week to appear beside an actual camel, leaning hard into the comparison. Ella accepted the job and spent one season performing. That was enough. The attention, the pointing, the stares. She left it behind and focused on her education. She disappeared from the public eye after that, never returning to the stage. Her father died in a house fire in 1899. Her younger brother passed away just 5 years later. Little else remains. No memoir, no interviews, just a few photos and show posters. But that silence says more than applause ever could. Ella Harper didn't build a legacy out of pain. She left it behind and chose her own ending instead. Number 8. The Two-Headed Boy of Bengal. In 1783 Bengal, a boy was born with a second head fused upside down to the top of his own. From birth, locals feared him. His midwife even tried to burn him alive, but he survived, scarred, silent, and stared at. His parents hauled him to Calcutta and began charging crowds to see the spectacle. Hidden beneath a sheet between viewings, the boy became an attraction. British doctors and officers came to witness it firsthand. The second head blinked, drooled, and even moved its lips. When the boy ate, The other mouth watered. When he slept, the second stared into nothing. At age 4, a cobra ended his life. His body was stolen, dissected, and shipped to England. Scientists later confirmed that both skulls had separate brains. His remains still sit behind glass in London's Hunterian Museum. The condition is now known as Craniopagus parasiticus. He was never given a name, just a label. Born feared, died exhibited, and buried in a cabinet for curiosity. Number 7. Alfredo Cadona. Alfredo didn't fall from fame, he plummeted. Born into the legendary Cadona circus family of Mexico, he was raised in the air. He trained until perfection became habit, eventually becoming the first trapeze artist to land a triple somersault mid-flight. He was fast, smooth, and fearless, equal parts athlete and spectacle. He married fellow aerialist Lillian Leitzel, and together they were circus royalty. But their marriage was volatile, their lives defined by risk. In 1931, Lillian died from a fall during a show in Copenhagen. Alfredo never truly recovered. He tried to keep performing, but an injury to his shoulder ended his career. He remarried, but depression followed him everywhere. In 1937, in a fit of rage and grief, he killed his wife, Vera Bruce, before turning the gun on himself. He was only 32. Alfredo spent his life chasing height and applause, but when the spotlight dimmed and the rigging was gone, he had nothing left to hold on to. Number 6. Edward Mordrake. Edward Mordrake was said to be young, wealthy, and well-liked, but cursed. Behind his head, according to old reports, grew a second face, distorted and grotesque. It never spoke out loud, but supposedly whispered at night, tormenting Edward with cruel voices only he could hear. He pleaded for doctors to remove it, but no one dared operate. The story ends with him taking his life at 23, leaving behind a note begging that the devil's face be destroyed before burial. His tale first appeared in a 1896 medical book, written as though factual. But Edward Mordrake never existed. There was no nobleman, no second face, no medical case. The entire story was fiction, crafted from sideshow rumors and passed off as a strange truth. Still, the myth refused to fade. It became folklore, inspiring horror films and endless retellings. Even in death, Edward's imagined pain lingered. His story was never real, but the fascination with it proves that sometimes myth is more powerful than fact. What do you think about him? Well, let us know. Number 5. The Jones Twins. The Jones twins never had birthdays. They were born conjoined and immediately turned into money. Dragged across America in the late 1800s, they were shown off while still in diapers, bodies treated like merchandise. Promoters didn't care. Strangers stared, doctors poked. Their parents, likely desperate, agreed to the whole deal. The twins were paraded from city to city, spending most of their brief lives under canvas tents. They lived just 15 months. Half of that was spent on display. No official cause of death was recorded. Maybe illness, maybe neglect. But it didn't matter. Their deaths made no headlines. No protests followed. Just silence. In circus archives, they're a footnote. No names, no legacy, just another exhibit in a world where childhood meant business. They weren't mourned as individuals. They weren't remembered as stars. They were just two infants born stuck together and used until they were gone. In the machinery of spectacle, they were barely more than a product line. All right, now, let's head over to number 4, Daniel Kajanus. Daniel was born in 1704 in Finland, the son of a Lutheran clergyman. By adulthood, he stood nearly 8 feet tall, towering over everyone he met. His size brought discomfort, but also opportunity. He joined the elite Potsdam Giants, an army unit made of exceptionally tall men, and later became a touring spectacle. He traveled through Europe, appearing before royalty and artists alike. In Paris, he was received by King Louis V. In London, he was examined by physicians, painted by artists, and stared at by crowds. Despite the attention, Kajanus wasn't a showman. He carried himself with dignity, wrote poetry in his spare time, and retired to Haarlem, where he lived quietly in the Proveniersuisse. Before his death in 1749, he requested a reinforced grave to protect his body. Even then, it wasn't enough. His bones were eventually taken for display. In life and death, Kajanus was never left alone. His height became both his curse and his legacy. Number 3, the regurgitating geek. Waldo didn't look like a sideshow act. He wore suits, spoke politely, and could have passed for a banker. That's what made it worse. On stage, he'd swallow marbles, coins, stones, and moments later, bring them back up in perfect order. He even regurgitated live animals, usually mice, still wriggling. There was no trick, no sleight of hand. He trained his throat, his stomach, and his timing until his body obeyed. The audience didn't know whether to clap or vomit. Women fainted, men gagged. The posters called him the Great Waldo, swallower of the impossible. Doctors thought he was disturbed. He didn't care. He found a space between horror and talent and made a career out of it. As vaudeville declined and the appetite for disgust faded, so did Waldo. No one knows where he died or when, but for a few queasy years, he was the only man who could turn swallowing into a full-time, stomach-churning profession. Number 2, Johnny Eck. Johnny was born with a condition that left his body ending just below the ribs. He had no functional legs, but that never stopped him. Raised in Baltimore alongside his identical twin brother Robert, Johnny entered show business early. Their most famous act came in 1937 with magician Raja Raboid. Robert would be sawed in half, and Johnny, strapped to a false lower body, would crawl out mid-act, sending audiences into chaos. But Johnny had already made a name for himself long before that. He performed with Ringling Brothers, Barnum, and appeared in the cult film Freaks. He later ran a penny arcade, designed model trains, painted backdrops, and gave shows in his backyard. He didn't dwell on pity or seek applause. He lived to create, perform, and share. By the time he died in 1991, Johnny had outlived the sideshow world entirely, but never stopped being a showman. He was half a body, but twice the talent. Number 1, Aloysia Wagner. Aloysia Wagner, known on stage as Violetta, was born in Germany in the early 1900s with tetra amelia. She had no arms or legs. But where others saw limitation, she built a life. She moved to New York and began performing at Coney Island's Dreamland, and later with Ringling Brothers. Her performances weren't shock shows. Using only her mouth and shoulders, she dressed herself, combed her hair, sewed, and even wrote. People came expecting pity. What they got instead was poise. Newspapers called her the armless and legless Venus, but her real strength was her presence. She later married wearing her ring on a chain around her neck and continued performing for years until her death in 1940. In a business that often reduced people to labels, Violetta never lost her name, her control, or her dignity. She didn't beg for sympathy or rely on gimmicks. She simply did what others couldn't, and she did it with grace. Her act was her life, and it was hers alone. If you've enjoyed watching this video, be sure to like it, share it, and subscribe. Thanks for hanging with us, and we'll see you in the next one.